Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, March 23rd, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about none other than former expelled member of Congress, George Santos, who was announced last evening after all of the resignations from the House of Representatives have come forth and a number of scandals that have popped up with the new Marjorie Taylor Greene decision to motion to vacate with the House speakership for Mike Johnson. Two things related to the House GOP with resignations that will take place now that will not be filled until January of 2025. There are a number of reasons here that it seems to be that George Santos wants to leave the Republican Party. I'm sure none more important than the fact that his own party voted to expel him in Congress, but now he's deciding to run as an independent for Congress in New York's 1st congressional district. Now, originally, George Santos announced his bid for election, re-election, whatever you want to call it, to a new district. He first ran in the 3rd district, in which he represented it for just under a year, and you found that for that period of time, George Santos underwent a lot of, scandals and difficult decisions when it came down to whether he was going to resign, whether he was going to stay, and ultimately he decided that he was going to stay in Congress until, of course, his colleagues decided that simply wasn't going to happen. And so when he made history as the first member of Congress expelled from Congress since the Civil War, it was a very, very big deal. The 3rd district had to hold a special election, and Democrats flipped it from red to blue. And so a lot of Republicans looked at this and said, you know what, George Santos is a poison to our party. We will never back him again. And even when he went on to, interviews and talked to Z-Way and said, I'm going to run for Congress, or maybe I will run for something else as a Republican, maybe, it was all of this conversation that really amounted seemingly to nothing until the State of the Union, in which he announced during the State of the Union that he was going to run for Congress in New York's 1st congressional district. Not try to beat Tom Suozzi, who's now the incumbent and arguably a popular one who had served in this district multiple times. He decided he's going to switch districts and challenge in a Republican primary Nick LaLota, who currently serves as a Republican incumbent. Now, Nick LaLota and, George Santos never really got along. There has been a lot of conversation, especially post-Congress, for George Santos about their very, very damaged and difficult relationship. He would call him out publicly. He would attack him publicly. And when he announced his bid for the GOP nomination in New York's 1st congressional district, a lot of people initially wrote him off. They thought that it would make absolutely no difference and that he was just going to collapse in the primary, and that was the end of George Santos. Or so we thought. And so then in the decision last evening to leave the Republican Party, deregister himself as a Republican in the state of New York, he decided now he is going to run as an independent. And so looking at this decision in his bid to return from Congress as an independent, I don't think he sees this as a way for him to genuinely get back to Congress, right? I think the reason why he's doing this is very much in retribution against the Republican Party, against what, the GOP stands for, and just generally trying to get back at members of Congress who, in his eyes, have turned their backs on him. And so with Nick LaLota in this position, he's representing a district that arguably a George Santos entrance into the race as an independent might actually make a difference. And I can explain to you exactly why. When you take a look back at the New York election results, New York's 1st district was amongst the most competitive ones that we saw on the Republican side, but it did go to the GOP by a pretty considerable amount. Nick LaLota won by around 11 points against Bridget Fleming in a district that, was competitive. It was a Biden, a Trump district by 4 points, I believe, in the 2020 election. And so, we knew with what was expected to be a red wave year that Republicans were more than likely going to win New York's 1st district. But 11 points was, considerable, but Nick LaLota really can't leave much to chance now. Why? New congressional maps were passed in the state of New York, and now his district is Trump +1. And so with a new district in the state of New York, that's a little bit narrower when it comes down to the presidential, every single thing will matter. Because what we've seen in the trends in districts like New York's 1st is that they don't exactly get that much better when you're looking at presidential election results. For instance, in 2016, Donald Trump won 52-42. It was a huge reversion from what we had seen in districts like these all across the country. Major shifts to the right relative to the 2012 election. And honestly, that makes sense, right? Hillary Clinton did worse than Obama in the popular vote, did worse than Obama in the Electoral College, and did worse than Obama in practically every single state. But in 2016, Trump really saw that and drove that shift heavily. The consistent trend here from 2008 to 2012 to 2016. Obama saw a narrowing in 2012, then Trump won in 2016 by, a larger margin than Nick LaLota, but then came 2020. Then came a reversion of the suburbs, came a reversion of areas like Long Island, all across the country, regions with very high populations of, highly educated voters, wealthier voters, suburban voters, on the outskirts of major cities. Same thing we're seeing in the Atlanta metro area, the Phoenix area, right? Northern Virginia. Long Island is not that different. And so when Donald Trump won here by 4, and now is in a district where he has won by 1, the question is, let's say Donald Trump performs worse in 2024 than he did in 2020. Right now, it doesn't seem like that's going to be our reality, but let's humor us for a second, because it isn't too far off from what actually happened, especially given all these pending court cases and a lot of scandals that have yet to break on the Donald Trump side. Assume with me for one moment that he performs worse than he did in 2020. How would that impact the congressional race? Well, we know that this New York 1st District has narrowed down from 4 points to 1 point, which means anything better for Biden means an improvement in the state of New York. What it also means is that people like Nick LaLota will be in a competitive election by default. The 2022 midterms in New York were an anomaly. That is how we can put it plainly, and I think that is exactly what it was. Republicans made major advancements relative to 2018 and 2020, and there was a reason for that. But their margins weren't exactly super strong. In New York's 22nd, it was won by less than a point. In the 17th, it was won by less than a point. In the 19th, it was won by 2 points. In the 4th, it was won by 4 points. Nick LaLota may have won by 11, but these large margins of victory here for the Republican Party were largely because Kathy Hochul was on the ballot, and she only won the top ticket race by roughly 5 points. What we are going to see with President Biden is that similar to 2020, he will probably win New York by 23 or win it by 22, right? Win it by similar margins that Obama and Clinton and Biden did in the last election, which means that a lot of these congressional races are in fact going to narrow up. That's exactly why you see this in presidential election years, for instance, like 2020. 2018 was different. Iowa saw 3 Democrats elected to the House. The next year, it was 1. And then the next year after that, it was 0. And the reason for that was because in 2020, between 2018, Donald Trump won these congressional districts. Donald Trump did well in all of these districts, did well enough that he was able to win in this state. And so what happened was, because there was very little crossover voting, a lot of districts reverted to how they voted on the presidential level. There was very little representation from Biden districts for Republicans and Trump districts for Democrats. Less than 30 seats in a Congress of 435 had voted in the opposite direction on the presidential, despite that being a very large number in elections like 2008, for instance, or 2004, or 2000. Before the Trump era and the Obama-Romney era, we really saw things a lot differently. Cross-voting was normal and entirely expected. There were long-standing representatives from states that were easily voting for the GOP. States like Arkansas that voted for McCain, states like Mississippi that voted for McCain, and Tennessee, and West Virginia, and North and South Dakota, and yet Democrats had the majority of the delegation in these states. The reason why that happened was because cross-voting was much more popular. So we're getting a little bit away from this, but the point I'm making in all of this is that we aren't in that reality again, which means a map like this one probably won't be the case this coming up, presidential election. Biden will win the 22nd district. Biden will win the 19th district. Biden will win the 17th district and the 4th district. The question is now, does he win the 1st district? I don't know. I don't know if Biden does well enough here that it makes a difference. But George Santos' intrusion in the race does make a difference. Because despite George Santos being someone who, voters were not happy with, his approval rating had dropped, his support had dropped, everyone went against him, the House Republicans expelled him, by nature of being on this ballot as a Republican, who is more to the right than Nick LaLota, who tries to capture in the Make America Great Again base, he's going to do damage. Should he make it on the ballot in New York's 1st district here, I genuinely think it could make a difference in a race that could very well be single digits. I expect the 1st district to be decided by single digits, and when you have a more extreme, more conservative candidate, who George Santos, I think despite all of his flaws, has made himself into a caricature that you see a lot of people talking about, discussing, and in a way that he could maybe pivot and say, you know what, everyone's out to get me. Pull the Trump card. Pull the card that everyone's out to get me. The Department of Justice is out to get me because they don't like what I'm saying, and the House Republicans don't like me because I exposed them for the things that they were doing, right? I think he could draw all these comparisons. He could make himself out to be the victim, and if voters are going to believe it, I don't know. But what they cannot do, what Republicans cannot afford, is a shift in support that could make a difference in an election like this one. Also, imagine a scenario like this, where you have a New York 1st district and, it's narrowed down because of the presidential race. And in a normal race, Nick LaLota would be winning maybe 5 points, right? 52 to 47. And then, that 1% goes somewhere else, right? 52-47, maybe 53-47. What if George Santos runs And because there are certainly voters out there that still like him. I mean, his approval rating wasn't 0%. There are voters who still like him, who do genuinely believe that he says it as it is, and do genuinely believe that his ideology and his right-wing stances are what they believe in. Remember, he came out completely against drag shows. He came out completely against different members of the LGBTQ community. I mean, he was, despite being a gay man himself, was someone who Republicans did prop up for a while before all of these scandals came out, right? George Santos made a name for himself because he took extreme stances and aligned himself heavily with President Trump, aligned himself heavily with the Make America Great Again wing. Even when he ran for Congress, he was demolished in 2020, came back in 2022, and tried to usher in all of these things. I mean, there are reasons to believe that there are voters out there who do genuinely like him. And back to that 53-47 point, what if he gets just 6-7%? I mean, think about it from this point. No Democrats are voting for George Santos. That's a done deal. The only person he is harming is the Republican candidate here, but I think he knows that. He's petty enough. We know him, right? We know him more than we know most members or former members of Congress. And while that may be a good or bad thing that's up for consideration, at the end of the day, we know how he acts. He's petty. He's looking for retribution, right? He's looking for a way to put himself and platform himself back on the level that makes him relevant. And what he's doing here is he's announcing his departure from the Republican Party. He's announcing that he's running for Congress in the 1st District, and he hates Nick LaLota. I genuinely think, for all that politics is worth and all that politics is good for, I think this is probably one of the most interesting reasons that a person would run for Congress, for the purpose of defying their old party and ensuring that they do not win. Do I think he will ultimately land Democrats a victory in the 1st District? I genuinely don't know. Because I think it would also be, if it was a Democratic victory, short-lived, and 2 years later, it would revert back to a GOP district. Because at the end of the day, this district is conservative. But I think right now, Republicans could not have more and more bad news come out of the House Republican side, and this is one of those pieces. Because for as much as we may laugh it off and write him off, I can guarantee you he will get votes in this district. Should he qualify as an independent, he will get votes in this district, and it will not be Democrats. And so every single vote matters. And when a House majority comes down to one as narrow as this one, I could only imagine the House GOP, Mike Johnson up in the election party room on November 5th, 2024, 11:50 p.m., looking at the House results, shuddering in his boots, because a House majority like this one will probably be just as close as it is in 2024, whether in favor of Democrats or in favor of Republicans. And if it comes down to some New York districts, which arguably take a really long time to count, they may be worried. Right? And George Santos may be that reason that they are worried. Because when you look at this map, it has been equalized. The congressional redistricting, benefits that Republicans have seen in North Carolina have been counteracted partially in New York and then across the country. And now we're back back to where we were in 2022, which is honestly good for Democrats because they lost the popular vote in 2022. They may win it in 2024. Regardless, though, the generic ballot numbers do see improvements, but we're focused on New York. And I think that there is a genuine possibility that even if he's getting, less than 10% support in the district, that could make all the difference for the Republican Party. That could make all the difference for Nick LaLota, and only time will tell to see what type of ads George Santos, should he qualify for this ballot, should he make it, and I think chances are he will. Should he make it there, the ads he will run about Nick LaLota, the attacks he will do, he's here for blood. He's not here to win a congressional race. He's not here to be this independent who, is the first independent representative in the House of Representatives. That's not him. He's not that guy. And we know it, and he knows it. And that's why he's deciding to run as an independent. So ultimately, this is a very, very fascinating race between 3 candidates, seemingly, in New York's 1st District that will give us a lot of time to really unpack whether or not this has an impact on 2024. This has an impact on people like George Santos and, people along those lines. Maybe. We will see. Time will tell. And time will be a very, very important part of this because it means, George Santos could be talked out of running in the race. He could be, paid off to not run in the race. I really don't know. Nick LaLota, though, really cannot leave anything to chance. I think Republicans are happy, though, that they're not running in a district that is Biden, right? There are plenty of Republicans running in district that Biden had won in 2020, but this isn't enough security. The ratings here are lean and likely are, but we've seen districts that have been declared as likely and safe flipped to the Democratic Party. And circumstances like this one tend to be the reasons. We'll see. I don't want to make a declarative, statement on this race other than the fact that I think Republicans are still ahead, and I do think that Nick LaLota is on track for victory. But I could see a reality, and it isn't super unlikely, in which George Santos pulls and siphons away enough votes in this race that Nick LaLota loses to a Democratic nominee But I don't see any reality in which the Republicans lose to an independent, Democrats lose to an independent, and certainly not an independent like George Santos. So let's keep an eye on this district. Let's keep an eye on what George Santos likes to do. I think it's very interesting. He's right. Platforming him is the way that he stays politically relevant. And I think there's a reason for that. But when we talk about elections, we have to talk about all of them. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.